Hello, welcome to Genesis Office Hours, episode number 35. I'm your host, Carrie Dills, and I'm super excited for what I think is going to be a really valuable conversation today on pricing your services. So I know there's going to be a lot of awesome stuff here. Before we get rolling, I would like to thank our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by the Conductor plugin. It is a developer's tool for building layouts and content displays for WordPress. You can learn more at conductorplugin.com/carryrocks. I did not make that up. Matt Medeiros made that up. And our other sponsor, Desktop Server, which is the absolute easiest way to set up multiple local WordPress installs for your development pleasure. You can learn more about them at carrydills.com/desktop server. And later on in the show, I'm going to be dropping a couple of coupon codes for both of those guys, so stay tuned for that. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Kirk Bowman, the visionary of value. How you doing, Kirk?
I'm doing well. How are you, Carrie?
I'm good. I'm so excited to have you on today. A few episodes back, I had Chris Lima on, and we were talking about his book on pricing, and it really sparked some great discussion around how we as consultants and developers and designers price our services. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say today. But for those who aren't familiar with, if maybe you haven't heard the term value pricing, can you give me the sort of the elevator pitch of what it is?
Sure. So the way I define value pricing is a business model that first determines what is the value to the customer and then sets a price that will create a healthy return on investment. Now, like all definitions, you probably want to unpack that a little bit. The way a lot of people charge for professional services is by the hour. We can get into a discussion if you want about the pros and cons of that. But value pricing says how long it takes is irrelevant. That the only thing that truly matters is the end result the customer is trying to achieve, and that value can be measured both in tangible and intangible ways. And so first you want to understand that perspective, and then once you do have a clear understanding, then you can set a price that's going to create a 3-to-1, 5-to-1, or greater return on investment for the customer.
Now, I know you used to be a big proponent of billing by the hour. Can you share your story of how you the light bulb kind of switched on value pricing and how you changed over to that model?
Sure. So there's a lot of irony in this story, but I've had a software development company for 20 years, and for the first 15 years we billed by the hour, just like everybody else. We would, track our time sorta and multiply it times our hourly rate and send an invoice and duck and hope the customer didn't complain and just paid it. I actually set up a panel discussion at a technical conference on billing and estimating practices for software developers. And there were 4 panelists, and I took the position at the time that the only way we can do custom work is by the hour. It's the only fair way to do it. It was kind of what I said. There was another panelist, a gentleman by the name of Jonathan, who took an opposite approach. He said, you know what, the only thing that matters is the value to the customer. And so it was my first introduction to value pricing, was literally being on a panel taking the opposing point of view. But Jonathan said one thing that just stood out to me. He said, if you bill by the hour, there's an artificial limit on your income. And I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and the idea that anything I was doing was going to limit my income just didn't sit well with me. And so that is where my journey started, was right there.
And was that transition just like, boom, my next project, I'm going to quote this based on value, or was it, did you have a sort of transition period of trying out the water, so to speak?
So I first took 90 days to study value pricing. I bought a couple books, I read those, talked to other people, read every blog article I could find, and after 90 days of studying it, I was convinced that it was the way I wanted to do business. And so I made a public commitment on another podcast to say, in 12 months, I will switch my business completely over to value pricing. So we immediately started with the next proposal that was due. We literally had done the discovery work, and we're about to do a proposal for the development work, and literally between the discovery and quoting the development, we switched from doing hourly to value pricing. And that was the first one. And then every new customer automatically was going on value pricing. And with existing customers, we just looked for opportunities when one project would end and another would start. But yeah, it was a transition both for learning and then for implementing. It actually wound up taking us 13 months to make a complete switch where we were no longer doing any type of hourly billing for any customers.
Kirk, taking 13 months instead of 12 months is unacceptable. I'm going to need you to step up your game.
Well, you know.
I know some folks are going to have questions for you, so if you're tuned in and listening live right now, if you want to send a tweet and just tag it with the hashtag GOHchat, we'll get that question answered for you on the air. Kirk, when I first heard the term value pricing, and I believe it was who introduced me to that term, it gave me a little bit of an uneasy feeling because what I was hearing was, here's a way to squeeze more money out of your customers. And you make a statement on your website that value pricing is not just about making increasing your income, but actually creating happier customers. So as my understanding of value pricing has evolved, that concept it's a win-win for both parties. It's not just about me taking advantage or getting the highest price tag. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So it's a common concern that value pricing is gouging the customer, but it's really not. And probably the best way for me to frame it is to kind of compare hourly billing to value pricing. So with hourly billing, you set a rate, and it's in the customer's best interest for it to take as few hours as possible because they want to pay the lowest price. And that's fair. The customer wants to pay the lowest price. We all want our money to go as far as possible. But it's in the professional's best interest for it to take as many hours as possible because we want to increase the revenue. And by the way, that's okay too. All right, a low price for the customer and a higher profit for, let me say this again, lower price for the customer and higher profit for the provider are both good things. The problem is that hourly billing puts those juxtaposed to each other. Value pricing aligns it. Value pricing is the only business model I'm aware of that truly aligns the interests of the customer and the interests of the provider. Why? Well, you both want the customer to get outstanding value. First of all, the customer wants outstanding value out of it because they actually want a substantial return on investment. I mean, in our world, customers are spending $5, $10, $15 more $1,000 for websites and other apps. They want to get a return of probably at least 2, 3, or 5 times their money on that, or they shouldn't have spent it. Well, if I as a professional make that my focus, then I'm aligning my interests with them. And by the way, it has advantages for me as well. Number one of which is if I'm making sure that they've got a high return on investment, they're going to be willing to pay for that, which means I should make more money. And by the way, I should if I'm generating that kind of value. But also, it forces you to only work with customers where you can create substantial value. I don't want to do something just because somebody wants to do it or just because it might be a good idea. If this is not going to contribute substantially to the business, I don't want to do it, because the only customers that are going to talk about me and the way I want to be talked about are the ones where I'm creating that type of value. So again, the idea that value pricing is gouging, it's not. It's aligning the interests of the professional and the customer in a way that nothing else does.
I love that. We've got a question from Jackie, and she wants to know, so going back to your process of transitioning over to value pricing, what would you recommend to someone as sort of milestones to transition over from hourly or flat rate to value pricing?
Sure. So I think step one is you need to study it, because you can't just try value pricing, in my opinion. You have to make a commitment and be either all in or all out. And here's why. Value pricing is a business model. Well, what is a business model? It's a set of beliefs. It's a philosophy. If you don't truly believe that creating value for the customer is the best way to do business, then you're probably not going to have the commitment to see it through. So my first recommendation would be to study it. And like I said, I studied it for 3 months. Second, realize it's going to take a period to transition. You heard me say it took 13 months. The best way to start is with one customer. Ideally, it's a small customer. It's a newer customer. It's a project where you can experiment and learn. And you know what? If it doesn't go well at all, it's okay. It's not going to hurt you. And then after you got one success under your belt, then add another. So take baby steps. Kind of that old metaphor of crawl, walk, run, right? To me, studying would be crawling. Walking would be starting with a new customer. Running would be trying to switch existing customers. I also think it's helpful to have. So when I made the transition, I actually hired Jonathan, the consultant that was on the panel. I hired him for the first 6 months on a retainer basis to help me. I'm not saying everybody needs to hire somebody, but you at least need somebody to have feedback. All right, so maybe 3 of you are going to try to switch to value pricing together. Okay, well, share your proposals with each other. Talk about the value you're going to create. In other words, don't try to do it alone. So I would say those 3 things. Study it, start with a new customer, and have somebody there to help cheer you along as you go.
Awesome advice. And you just touched on this, but a follow-up question, how do you have that conversation with existing customers, hey, I'm your flat rate and, we're about to switch it up and try something different. How do you start that conversation?
So first of all, you want to look for an opportunity where you're starting a new project with them. You don't want to try it in mid-project. 2, if you are working on a project with them, you can begin to drop hints or kind of educate them a little bit. So for example, you're at the end of a status call, you can go, hey, by the way, I know we're still working on this project, but I just want to give you a heads up. I'm doing some experimenting right now with a new business model. I'm not quite ready to I'm roll it out to all customers, but I just want to give you a heads up that I'm probably going to, on our next project, I want to try something different. And sometime in the future, I want to have a conversation about that. You can just try and drop hints. You could certainly begin, if you do any type of regular email to your customers, like a newsletter, or you have a process where, every time a customer reaches a certain milestone or something, you're sending out an email, you can begin to include mentions about this business model in there. For example, we do that in our sales process. Every step in the sales process, we have an email written. And not only do we know what we're going to say, but every email both has questions we're asking the customer. It also has a little bit in there about why we do business the way we do it. We're educating them along the way. So I would say just begin to drop hints, and then when there's an opportunity, when there's a new project, you literally sit down and go, hey, I know we billed by the hour in the past, but we're operating under a new business model, and you want to start explaining it why it's advantageous to them. That's where you want to start. You don't want to sit down and say, hey, by the way, I'm going to do this because I'm going to make more money. It's not the best way to start the conversation. But when you sit down and you say, and then you begin to elaborate on why it's not a good fit, and then you say, here's why I'm switching, they'll be receptive. Not everybody will, but the customers you want to keep will be receptive.
Got a little bit of a video audio delay there. I think, how do I phrase this? The moving into that value conversation and that role of looking out for the customer's best interest and not just making a dime on a project is so satisfying as a consultant and a developer. It's so much more satisfying than just turning out a regular brochure site. I'm not saying that's bad, but as I've grown in my business, trying to transition from just being a developer who can help execute, XYZ, stepping into that consultant role and figuring out how I can bring my knowledge to the table to really make a difference in a customer's business, and that's value. And it's at the end of the day, it's just so much more soul satisfying to work on projects like that.
I agree. I mean, and even developers, consultants who bill by the hour, I think most of them have the customer's best interests at heart, but the business model doesn't align that, and it creates barriers, right? So, for example, when you're billing by the hour, if the customer has a comment or a question you want them to communicate with you, if you're billing by the hour, some customers will go, wait, if I reach out with this question, it's going to cost me money. I don't want to do that. Value pricing removes that barrier along with several others. But yes, you want to look for opportunities. I don't want to work with customers where the result is marginal. I want to work with customers where the result is extraordinary.
Good stuff. We've got a and he wants to know how to apply value pricing when your customers are other developers and they're charging their clients hourly rates. So let's say you're, maybe in this circumstance, subcontracting. Everybody's got to make their margin. What are your recommendations there?
So it's a little bit more challenging when you're a subcontractor. I think the first thing is, do you have direct contact with the customer? Okay, if you do, you want to have a value conversation with them. In fact, I know our mutual friend Curtis McHale. Curtis does work for agencies where it's actually the agency's customer, and they bring him in on a particular expertise. He won't engage if he can't talk directly to the customer and discuss the value, because he's still going to value price it based on the value to the customer. And Curtis is so good at what he does that the agencies trust him and are willing to allow him to do business that way. I also know for a fact that Curtis won't do business if they won't do it that way. So that's the way he is. But let's say you don't have contact with the customer, okay? Which I've worked with both subcontractors and employees, and when we made the transition, the first thing I did was I just told my subs, I said, hey, I'm switching this business model. I'm going to ask you to give me a fixed price on this. And so I did, and they did, and what they found is because I was charging higher margins, they could charge me higher margins, and it was a win-win for both of us. I haven't had one sub that I've asked to go to fixed pricing with me that has pushed back. So I understand the question he's asking. I guess the short answer would be, if you can have a value conversation with a customer, then you can truly value price. If you can't have a value conversation with a customer, and I mean the end customer, not whoever you're doing the sub work for. If you don't have direct conversation with a customer, it's a lot more challenging. Essentially, I guess all you can do there is value price bring you, but that's more challenging.
I had the chance to hear you speak at WordCamp DFW last month on the topic of value pricing. And by the way, that's up at WordPress.tv if anybody wants to check that out later. And you talked about, well, Mike has a question, and this is what it made me think about. He says, how do you handle a new project or startup where the numbers are hard to pin down? And I remember you talking about when you're looking for whatever that set of metrics is that you can bench your success on. It's not just dollars. There's an emotional component as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So first of all, you as a professional have to believe that you create value, and you have to have a good, confident perspective about the value you create. I encourage everyone to go back and look at previous projects and try to, post-mortem or in retrospect, what was the value we created? And look at that. You will find that most of the time you are probably creating way more value than you realize. Once you have that perspective, then you can go confidently into these situations where it's not real direct tangible value. Sometimes it is more intangible. Sometimes it depends on the product or service. Sometimes it depends on the business situation, like a startup. But at the same time, like if I'm talking to a startup, I want to know, okay, well, why do you want to hire me? What is your product or service going to be? Who's your target customer? How do you think you're going to price? What is your time frame to break even? What is your time frame to turn a profit? And just by asking those questions, you're going to get a feel. I mean, you may not be able to narrow it down to, hey, like on an e-commerce project, if we increase conversions by 20%, the average sale is $500, and then, do the math. But you can still go, you know what, this business, they're aiming to be $1 million business in 12 months, right? So you can get some metrics, and I don't want to make it sound like value pricing it's not a formula, okay? It is an art. That's why I call it the art of value. but you can learn to ask questions and have the conversation and get a feel for it. And it's okay to go on instinct. In fact, my team occasionally accuses me of pulling a price out of my butt. And what they mean is I'm guessing. And sometimes I guess. But guess what? The more you practice, the better you get.
Excellent advice. And the pull quote on that is, as professionals, you first have to believe that you create value before you can go trying to price based on value. Right. We have a question from Sarah, and she says, I've been considering charging for discovery for a while, but I'm scared I'll lose projects to others who will just provide a quote. What are your thoughts on charging for discovery, and how do you present that?
So I do charge for discovery. Okay. In fact, I think giving away that work, you're giving away value. So first, you have to believe that discovery is valuable. We go back again to, like you said, what the money quote was, right? You have to believe you create value. You need to honestly believe that doing discovery has value, and so you need to be able to explain to the customer why that's valuable. One of my favorite quotes comes from an author by the name Mahan Khalsa, and he says, the way you sell is indicative of the way you serve. I want customers to begin to perceive, when I start having a value conversation with them, this is not the typical consultant. This guy is asking questions, and he's approaching business in a totally different way than the other 3 hourly guys that I'm talking to. I want to stand out. I want to be different. I want them going, in fact, I kind of like it when somebody goes, man, you're totally coming at this from a totally different angle. I have some customers that are direct and go, why are you asking these questions? And I love that, because then I can go, hey, what's important to me is the value to you. And so I basically want to educate the customer on, number one, the fact that value is important to me because it's important to them, and two, be able to communicate what's the value of discovery. So yes, I do charge for it. And I tell people that. I say, look, first engagement with us is going to be paid discovery, and I'll get the questions like, well, why do I need to do that? You mean I got to pay you for a quote? Yeah. If you have a customer who's not willing to invest a few thousand to figure out what to do before you actually do it, I don't think they're the right kind of customer. So, kind of the question was, well, I might lose business. Yeah, you will. But the business you lose is not the business you want.
That's a great point. And, not everybody is at that, dealing with clients who have, a couple thousand, their entire budget may be a couple of thousand for a project. So I think it's even you can apply value pricing even on those smaller projects by educating the customer of, these are some things that will to do to help, like let's not put that slider on there, as opposed to just being an executor, still provide a lot of value in your advice that you give them.
Well, I would add, I don't know him. I just met Bill at WordCamp DFW, but Bill Erickson, he does a lot of projects in that $2,000 range, but he has it down to what you might refer to as productized consulting, right? He knows exactly how to do it. He knows how to do those size projects in a way that's profitable for him, that delivers value to the customer, and so you can still value price even in that lower range.
Bill has a system that doesn't quit. He has just an amazing breakdown of how he approaches his services. And a little plug, I may just have him on the schedule for a future episode of Genesis Office Hours.
I'll be tuning in for that one.
Sweet. Lots of good discussion happening on Twitter. Jackie wants to know what's a typical charge for discovery. And I would say, every project is going to be different. One of those, and Kurt, I'll let you chime in on your opinion too, but one of the first questions I'm asking out the gate is, what is your budget? Because that gives me an idea of, or do you have a budget for this project? And that gives you an idea right off the bat. If their budget is $1,000, then you can gauge the size of the project and say, well, that's just unrealistic. You're not going to get X, Y, Z for $1,000. I'm not even going to waste your time on discovery. How would you approach that?
So, to give a direct answer to the question of how do you price discovery, I think you need to look at discovery probably as some percentage of what the overall project would be. I think generally, I think discovery can range anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000. Right now, $10,000 is probably going to be on somewhere like a $50,000 to $100,000 project. Right, $1,000 might be on a $10,000 project. And I'm not saying that 10% or 20% is the ratio, but I am trying to answer the question directly with something that she can apply. Now, to go further, I don't price every discovery the same, right? I'll have a conversation. I'll consider what is the value to the customer to do this discovery, what's the size of the project, how much do they want to work with me, is this an area where I have expertise that nobody else has, or where it's something I know I'm really good at. I'll consider those kind of things. But yes, I do charge for discovery, and I think you should be charging for discovery because it sets you apart as somebody who says, you know what, I value what I do. I'm not going to give it away.
You mentioned earlier that hourly based pricing, kind of sets you at odds with the client because they want you to do it as fast as you can. And of course, you want to make as much money as you can and take as long as you can. And you said that how long it takes is irrelevant. The guys that are sponsoring our show today, Desktop Server and Conductor plugin, are both tools that help you speed up your development process. So let's say I can, actually Chris Ford, one of our listeners, she mentioned after the episode last week that what she had spent forever trying to do with the Genesis grid loop, she was able to do in about 5 minutes with Conductor. I'm about to toss you a big softball of a question. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Go for it.
But when you're talking about these tools that help you operate your business more effectively, should you be charging less just because you can do it faster?
No. Why should I make less money because I'm smarter? Because I can do it faster. Okay? And to be honest, I think a customer would really want to work with a consultant who's smarter and faster. Okay? And that's definitely worth more money. That's one of the reasons I can't stand billing by the hour, is because as you get better at your craft, and I think anybody who truly cares, which most people in the WordPress space do, and I totally lost my train of thought. If you truly care, you ought to be paid more because of that, right? And in hourly billing, if you work faster, you get paid less. Now somebody will go, well, hey, I'll just raise your rate. Well, how high are you going to raise your rate? And at what point are you going to start quoting a rate and people go, it just makes no sense. So yes, if you work smarter, you should get paid. And should you be so here's my question on that. If you learn to do something in 1 hour instead of 3, has the value to the customer changed? Probably not. In fact, I would argue the value's increased because you can deliver it faster. So should you be giving the customer a discount just because you learned to create the same value faster? I don't think so, because the value's still there.
Well put. You hit that softball right out of left field. Perfect. Over the fence. We've got some more questions coming in, but I want to take a break for a second and talk about your new podcast called The Art of Value that you released here recently. What was the impetus behind going the podcast mode?
So I prefer talking over writing, and so podcast is a medium that fits my personality very well. I can get on a show like this and answer questions. I could do this 4 or 5 times a day and just love it. Writing is harder for me, and so podcast was just natural for me. But the thing is, you've heard the old adage, if you want to learn something, teach it. Well, I would say if you want to learn something, interview other people who do it. And so, I've published 12 interviews so far with people in the value pricing space. That's probably only about half of the ones I've recorded so far. So I've had 20-something conversations with people that are thought leaders, authors, speakers in this area, and I've learned so much from doing that. So that's really where it came from. I guess the other thing would just be I started value pricing because I have a software business, and I realized I wanted to change the business model. But what I found is I've got a passion for this business model. I can see 3 to 5 years down the road, I'm not going to be doing software development anymore. I'm going to be, just continuing to talk about this and do consulting and speaking and writing because I love this value model, and I love helping people switch. So yeah, the show. Thanks for the plug. I'll pick that ball up and run with it. Yeah, artofvalue.com/show is the podcast. We've got 13 episodes that have been released so far. We're doing about 2 a week right now. We'll probably slow that down to 1 a week once we get kind of into the December time frame. I've already released one. I guess I've interviewed 2 people from the WordPress space so far. I've got one with Curtis McHale. Why? What was the title of it? Why? I can't remember. Something like why value pricing is important to the freelancer, or why pricing is important to the freelancer. And then I did one with Troy Dean that just came out. Why value pricing is good for the customer. And then I've actually got one coming up with Matt Medeiros. It'll be out in early December. I know Matt's one of his companies is the sponsor of the show, so yeah, check it out. It's free. Go to artofvalue.com/show, and we hope you get a lot of value out of it, and we'd love to get your feedback.
It's amazing. I'll plug it too. I actually was just listening to the Troy Dean episode earlier this morning. Kirk, you might not want to know this, but you go to the gym with me. When I'm pumping iron, when I'm maxing out, I'm listening to your podcast. So that's awkward.
No, that's good. That's the thing you asked about why podcast. That's one of the reasons, is because it's a very intimate medium, right? People are listening to the show, and so you've got their full attention. You're in their ears, and people do it when they're doing things like working out, running errands, driving, doing laundry, mowing the yard. And so that's one of the reasons I love the medium.
My first exposure to you was actually, I was mowing the yard, and I was listening to, I believe it was the Freelancer Show podcast, and they had you on, and you were talking about just kind of walking through the process of valuing, and I was mind blown. Like I wanted to stop mowing halfway through the lawn so I could come in and write some ideas down. So definitely, I know time is precious that you have to listen to podcasts, but do definitely check out the Art of Value podcast. I think you'll find great value there.
Well, if I can add one tip on listening to podcasts, make sure the app you're using to listen allows you to play them at like time and a quarter or time and a half. I've now gotten to where I listen to almost all podcasts at time and a half, and so I can actually absorb more content. So
wow, you listen really fast.
There are some people who do it 2 times. I can't do it 2 times, but time and a half, I've learned where I can absorb it.
Yeah, I listened to it on just the one time, and I still have to rewind to listen to some things again. We had a question from Leonica, and she is asking a great question. What do we mean when we're talking about discovery? So no doubt something can be lost in the translation there, but what do we call that? Is sort of that initial interaction with the customer where you're digging in to find out what their needs are, what the project requirements are, and then what possible solutions you can bring to the table. So before you can provide an accurate quote, you've got to understand what the problem is you're trying to solve. So that discovery phase is really about kind of figuring that out. Anything to add there?
Yeah, I would agree. First of all, I think, and I can't remember the name of it, but there's a post on your site where you talk about discovery, and so if you can remember the name of that or look it up, I would encourage you to mention that. But I would say discovery is really where you are digging into the customer's business to find out how do they work, why do they work that way, what needs to change, why do they want it to change. Probably one of the most important things discovery does for my customers is help them prioritize. I find out a lot of times what customers think they need or want is not it. It's not the biggest issue. And so discovery gives you the time to get to know them, and it also gives them a chance to get to know you. But the idea that you're going to spend hours or days trying to learn something about a customer's business for nothing, for no charge, I can't imagine that. Because what I tell customers is, look, when you do discovery, the value of discovery is the questions I ask. Because I ask great questions. I study the art of asking questions. I have in Evernote, I have a notebook of questions. you're going to learn so much just by the conversation we have, because I'm going to ask you things nobody else has ever asked you. I'm going to make you think about this in a different way. I'm going to give you an outside perspective. That is worth so much.
Great stuff. Man, I need to hire you just so I can hear your questions. Which, by the way, do you do consulting for people that are maybe listening to the show and they've been, reading the books and listening to the podcast and want maybe some practical advice for a certain situation? Or are you available for that?
I do. So I offer two things. One, I offer group coaching, and I should say I will be offering group coaching. I'm currently putting the details on that, but my goal is in January to open up a group coaching program where people can participate in a group, small group, but it would be something where people can interact with me and interact with each other, and there will be teaching and role playing and interaction, that kind of thing. And then I also do one-on-one. One-on-one, I call it consulting. So coaching for me is in a group model. Consulting is one-on-one. Probably the group fits better for freelancers, small businesses. The consulting works better for businesses that probably have 5, 10 or more people on their team. But sure, I'm happy to help people. I encourage people, check out the podcast, and we try to provide a lot of free resources out there. But if you would like to go deeper, be happy to have a conversation with you to find out if it's a good fit.
Awesome. We have a question from Ben, and he wants to know what's your percentage split between referrals and then just inbound organic leads when it comes to finding your clients?
I'd say it's probably about 40% referrals and about 60% inbound. And, probably a year ago I would have said it's 50-50. It kind of tends to vary, but we've been doing business in the software space for 20 years, so we're just out there a lot. I mean, our name is known by not only our customers, but our competitors, people around the space. And so, yeah, we do get a lot of people who refer us just because our name is in a lot of different places. So it's probably 40, 60, 50-50, something like that.
Okay. And when you say your software company, you're talking about Mighty Data, not Art of Value, correct?
That's correct. So Mighty Data is the custom software company that I have, and Art of Value is the startup that grew out of Mighty Data to help people learn to value price.
Awesome. Chris wants to know if it sounds like chipmunks when you're listening to those podcasts at 2 times.
No, it doesn't. Most podcast apps have the ability to increase the speed without changing the frequency.
Sweet. We've got a question from Paul. He couldn't make it live today, but left a comment over on my site, and he says, I wonder how you might apply value-based pricing to small churches, ministries, or nonprofits. Generally, I'm guessing smaller budgeted customers.
All right, I may get in trouble a little bit here, but you did ask for my opinion. I don't subscribe to this perception that and I'm going to use the broad term nonprofits, that nonprofits don't have money. Nonprofits have to raise money just like a for-profit business does. The only difference with a nonprofit is they're doing it through donations and fundraising, and they basically can't have any extra on the books, right? But they're still a business, okay? And so now, yes, are there some small nonprofits? Are there some small churches? Certainly, you have to take that into account. But this idea that you have to work with those types of businesses any differently, I don't subscribe to that. Because if you're creating value for a nonprofit or for a church, it's still the proper thing to pay you for that value. And I don't think you should discount it. In fact, I think discounting is an evil sin. But yes, I called it a sin. I did. So how would I approach it? The same way I'd approach anything else. So let's say, for example, you're doing a website that's going to help increase either the amount per donation or the numbers or some type of conversion for a nonprofit. There's a metric you can base it off of. And if you can create a ratio where you're going to increase donations by X number, and they invest, let's say that they invest $10,000 with you to increase donations by $50,000 a year. Sounds like a pretty good deal to me. So I just don't subscribe to the idea that you've got to treat them any differently. Now, I'm not saying be cold-hearted, because this could sound cold-hearted, but I'm just saying I don't subscribe to the idea that these organizations, they still have budgets, they still have to spend their money wisely. They're only going to invest their money if there's value there.
Sure. I had a brief failed business adventure. It was a social media marketing company, and we worked with nonprofits and basically approached it as if we run a targeted fundraising campaign, there's an obvious value, price metric you can put on that if we hit goals. Now our model didn't pan out so well because it was a percentage base, and we apparently weren't very good at our jobs, but live and learn. So another question that comes to mind, I mean, right now we're talking pretty much about services, but does value pricing have any place in the world of products?
Certainly. In fact, I think when you're pricing a product, the only way to price it, in my opinion, is to consider the value of the customer. Now, when you're pricing a product, it's a different kind of conversation, right? When you're pricing services, you get to have a value conversation with every single customer. You get to price every specific customer. In fact, one of the things we say with value pricing and services is price the customer, not the service. But when you're dealing with products, you have to at some point price the product. Value conversations, right? You can still identify personas for your customers and have conversations with them and have enough of them where you can begin to say, okay, if my target market is financial service firms that manage between 50 million and 500 million in assets, and they're typically 5 employees, and this product is going to help them do X or Y, you can begin to get a broader understanding of value for that segment, right? Chris Lemma talks a ton about segmentation, and so yeah, it still applies. I don't subscribe to this idea, and it really kind of the idea that everything's $9.99 or $97, that charm pricing. I think that's baloney. If it's $97, call it $100. Be proud of what you sell. There's studies out there that show that higher end restaurants don't put cents on the menu. There's a perception that if it's $15 instead of $14.95, there's higher value there. And so, I think you do this. Yes, does value have a role in pricing products? Definitely. One thing I love to see in the WordPress space with plugins is they're always usually offering options, right? And so like Matt, the conductor plugin, I think he's got 3 different options if I remember right. That plays into it, considering the value. What's the value for somebody to have a plugin on one site versus 3 versus unlimited or 10 or whatever? So yeah, value has huge implication on product pricing. And by the way, don't do the cost plus thing.
So cost plus or time and material, never ever?
I don't think it applies. Now some people will say you need to know, like if you're developing a product, it's good for you to know, how much quote money have you put into building it. And I think that may have some merit, but ultimately what I'm looking at is what's the value I'm creating for the customer, what's the price I can set for that, and at that price, can I make enough money for it to be profitable? In other words, I'm not looking at my cost first. I'm not looking at my cost and going, what's the markup? I'm looking at the customer and saying, what's the value I can set, and then I'll look at, does that cover my costs? Toyota does the same thing with cars. Toyota does not look at a car from a cost perspective. They look at what's the car we can build, and what's the persona, and what's the customer willing to pay for it, and then can we make a car at that price and be profitable? If a car maker does it, yes, you can do it with other things.
You touched on something that I'd like to explore a little bit and get your opinion on. You have a long history in software, WordPress specifically, and there's been so much discussion in the community this year about how we price our themes and are we charging enough for plugins and la. What is your perspective as an outsider, so to speak, about how the WordPress community is selling their products and services?
On the product side, the stuff's dirt cheap. Dirt cheap. I mean, Gravity Farms could probably increase the price of their highest tier to $1,000 a year, and most people would still pay it. I mean, I'm just blown away that I can get an unlimited license for gravity forms for $200 for a year. Now, the one thing I am glad to see is people are moving away from this unlimited model. You pay a price once and you never pay anything again. I think this, the annual subscription is a good idea. But yeah, stuff is so underpriced, particularly on the product side. And I think that contributes to people underpricing on the service side too. So yeah, my summary is it's dirt cheap. I like the prices where they are.
Yeah, get your unlimited licenses now while you can.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, well, I think part of the things are very inexpensive, but we've also created this customer base that expects those lower price points. So moving the needle and having those conversations or quote unquote convincing potential customers that these products are worth more is a little bit of an pushing a rock uphill. But I'm see people talking about it.
Well, so let's talk about how you push that rock uphill. I think the first thing you got to realize is there's a certain category of customers you don't want, and the sooner you screen them out, the better. Okay? Because by the way, those are the customers. The customers who want the cheapest price are the ones who will grill you the most, try to squeeze the most value out of you. Okay? You just don't want to work with those people. Okay, so I think you've got to set up an onboarding process that screens those people out. The other thing you've got to do, and we said it earlier, you've got to believe you create value. You've got to have confidence. All right, you've got to be willing to be bold. But yeah, you're right. WordPress has got this whole open source thing, and so everything should be free. And I'm like, says who? Okay. Congratulations to Matt and Automatic and the WordPress Foundation, all that stuff for making the open source. Congratulations. Guess what? Matt still has a company that makes a profit. So if Matt Mullenweg makes a profit, shouldn't everybody else? This idea that it's free, I'm sorry. I need to get off my soapbox, but as you can tell, I got a little bit of an opinion about it.
That's quite all right. And as the saying goes, WordPress is free, meaning free as in speech, not free as in beer. So yes, we are free to use it, but no, it's not just a totally cost-free solution. So appreciate you sharing your highly opinionated thoughts on that. I have a question. Any tips for helping clients assess the value of a project? And I guess this is where you're talking about kind of your secret questions that you're asking to kind of help dig. But how do you help them? How do you figure out and what questions to ask? Is that just your experience and your artfulness?
No, I've got where I started is I read books and blogs and I copied other people's questions. I asked people like Curtis McHale, what questions do you ask? And others. One of my favorite questions to ask is, why are you doing this now? Why not 6 months ago? Why not wait another 6 months? You'll find out things. They'll say things like, well, I've been working for a year to get the budget approved. Wait, what? This is something you've needed for a year, and so you've been waiting a year to get the budget approved? This has high value, right? You'll find out things like that. What does success look like? Is this your number one priority? Right? I had a customer last week where we quoted him something, and it was really interesting. We have a minimum price, and we tell every customer in the first email we send them, hey, by the way, here's our minimum price. Sorry, I was just watching something on chat. I got distracted. We tell them our minimum price, and then and they said, okay, we can do that. So we came back with a proposal, and of course, our three options were higher than our minimum. And they go, wow, that's really outside the price we were thinking. We're going to have to step back and look at the value for this. I said, exactly. I want you to do that. And what came out of that conversation, they said, well, your minimum was this, and we were thinking this, and they were thinking, well, there's not that big a difference between where they were and our minimum, so they figure, well, we'll get the minimum. Well, then when we came back higher, they had to look at the value that they said themselves they had to look at the value. And I was like, excellent, do it, right?
That's awesome when you can lead them to realize the answer themselves. I love that question of, oh my gosh, it just fell out. I wasn't even looking at Twitter and it still kind of fell out of my head. But what does success look like? And if they now maybe they don't know exactly what success looks like, and you can help kind of walk them through that process. But generally speaking, if it feels like pulling teeth to get the answer of what a success looks like, that's a big telltale of whether or not that's a customer you want, as you previously said. So I like kind of those initial screening questions, and have piggybacked on some Curtis McHaleisms when it comes to going through those that vetting process for new clients. But man, oh man, we just need to get Curtis on here since we've been talking about him the whole time.
Yeah, definitely get Curtis on the show. He's a good interview.
All right, let's see. We've got a few more minutes left here, so if you're tuning in, I'm talking with Kirk Bowman from The Art of Value. If you want to ask a question on Twitter, you can use the hashtag GOHchat. And we'll try to get that answered here for you. Let's see, tips for helping clients understand the ROI part of things. So we kind of touched on that earlier, talking about it's easy to determine ROI with a product. For instance, I have sponsors on the show, and I charge a certain amount for sponsorship, and if they can get a return of 4 or 5 times on their investment by products sold, then that's easy to determine ROI. But when it's not quite so obvious, how do you help clients understand that value?
So you've got to answer the question why. Every customer, when they call you, they want to talk about the what. I want a new website. I want e-commerce. I want a theme. I want this. I want that. Okay, great. And you do have to talk with them a little bit about what. I mean, I have to have the what conversation a little bit up front just because, I want them to know that I'm actually listening to what they're saying. But then at the same time, I transition as quickly as I can to why do you want that? And I've got 100 different ways to ask that probably. But ultimately, I want to know why do you want that? Why is that important? Why is that the thing you need right now? Why is that the thing you're willing to invest money in? Or are you willing to invest money in? Is this something you thought of, on the drive in this morning? You just called me to, see what that random thought was because you have extra time? I mean, I want to find that kind of stuff out. So just you got to get to what is the result they want. Now, I think the question that you asked was kind of, okay, if it's not as clear, if it's more intangible. And again, I go back to you can still ask questions about, well, what business are you in? What's your average sale? How many customers do you have? What's your annual revenue? How is this project going to help you? In other words, do you want this project to increase your revenue? Do you want this project to cut your costs? Are you trying to save time? Are you trying to increase conversions? Even if it's quality of life. I mean, I've literally had a conversation with a customer recently where we were talking custom development. Part of the reason he was willing to invest in custom development is because a year from now, he wants to be working 3 days a week instead of 5 days a week. He's kind of, he's not at retirement age, but he's heading in that direction, and he wants to begin to make that transition. And so, guess what? That has value. I'm going to call that out to him. When it comes to proposal time, I'm going to go, oh, by the way, one of the reasons you said you wanted this is so you can start working 3 days a week a year from now, and here's why I think this will help support it. So, yes, it's easier when you can multiply X times Y, but even if you can't, you can still find valuable things the customer wants and, put that in a ballpark.
And a kind of a follow-up question to that from Sarah, if we're going back to, tangible value, such as, working with products or clicks or whatever it may be.
Right.
How do you know that your work will increase that by however many fold? Does that go back to the boldness of you believe in the value you create, or what do you think?
Yeah, so this question, I'm not sure of this question, but if I might reword it, I might say, do you guarantee results? And I think, you need to realize the more you guarantee, the more risk you're taking, and so the higher premium price you're going to charge. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you can't 100% guarantee the customer is going to achieve the result because they have to do, okay? So, but there's, some people run their business model in a way where if the customer's not doing their part, then they'll just end the engagement early. So you can basically start at, you can say, okay, I'm going to give you a money back guarantee. If you're not satisfied, I'll give you your money back. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is say, you know what, I'm actually going to tie my price to the results we get. If you're going to do that, you need to make sure that the customer is going to do their part, that you're going to hold them accountable, and then you've got some structure in place to deal with that. So you can kind of do it along the spectrum. You can just basically discuss the value that can be created and set your price accordingly. You can go further and actually guarantee the results if you want. But if you're guaranteeing the results, you better be charging more.
Hear, hear. You mentioned earlier that you have a minimum price for engagements.
Yep.
And Sarah wanted to know, does that create price anchoring? Are they thinking about that number?
You bet. You bet. Of course it does. Of course it does. And sometimes it anchors the right way, and sometimes it anchors the wrong way. The story I shared a minute ago, it actually anchored the wrong way. But yeah. But what it really does, yes, it anchors, but I would say more than not, it just helps customers that are not a good fit disqualify themselves. The ones that stick around, it anchors to some degree, but not so much, because we have such a value conversation with them after that I would say no, it's more of a screening tool. It can anchor in some situations, but no, not as much, now that I kind of talk out loud about it.
It's good to talk out loud.
I told you I learn something every time I do one of these.
We've had so many great links dropped in the on Twitter for the GOH chat hashtag. I will go collect those later and put them in the show notes for this episode. If you're catching this after the fact, you can go to carrydills.com/podcast/value-35, and that'll get you back to this episode and everything that we've talked about. Kirk, before we close out today, I do want to mention our sponsors again. I teased that there were some coupon codes available just for Genesis Office Hours listeners. So for starters, let's go with Desktop Server. They just rolled out a minor release this week while they're preparing for the big 4.0. But a little tip and trick is that you can use Desktop Server to back up and restore your site. So if you've got your site out there live, you can pull that down, have a local copy of it, and if anything were to happen, a hack or just something, you get the terrible white screen, you could just redeploy your site from Desktop Server in a hurry. So you can learn more about that at carrydills.com/desktop server, and it's actually a free product, but if you want to look at the premium and see if that's right for you, there is a coupon code CDILLS-GOH. And then also the lovely Conductor plugin, which is actually I like the name because I just picture someone conducting a little layout. They rolled out a new add-on for WooCommerce. So basically, if you've got a WooCommerce site and it's got all those custom fields that are with products, you can now pull those into Conductor and use them in your output. You can check them out at conductorplugin.com/carryrocks. and use the coupon code CarryRocks20 for a 20% discount. And I gotta say, those of you I'm gonna have to get them to change those coupon codes because they're kind of embarrassing. Carry Rocks. All right. Well, if you are tuning in to Genesis Office Hours either live or after the fact, and you think this show has value for you and has helped you out, I would love for you to head on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review so that other people can find the podcast. Kirk, where can people find you to engage with you or follow up with you?
So probably the two best ways are our website, artofvalue.com, and then on Twitter, I'm at artofvalue.
Awesome. And you, sir, I mean, your wisdom nuggets all over the place. I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to this episode maybe 2 times so that you sound like a chipmunk and and really let this advice soak in. But I so appreciate your time today, and thank you for everybody for tuning in and the great questions, and I will see you next week. Thanks, Kirk.
Thanks, Carrie.